So I'm Morgan Griffith, Agrochemical Program Manager with the Public Health and Ag Resource Management Division, the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. So we were asked today to testify about the 2024 annual report of the Agricultural Innovation Board, or AIB for short. And also just to address some follow-up things from Tuesday that came up when we came in to talk about the development of the proposed rule for best management practices for neonic treated seeds and also neonic pesticides. So first, a question came up on Tuesday about the definition of IPM, or integrated pest management, that's in the proposed rule. The proposed rule references back to the definition that's in the Vermont Rule for Control of Pesticides. So this definition is an all-encompassing definition that actually advocates agreed upon during the public comment period of the pesticide rule. So that's the origin of this definition. It incorporates components of both EPA and USDA working definitions of IPM. So I'm happy to answer any more questions, but that's kind of where it came from.
When did you say that was?
So when the pesticide rule went through a public comment, so it was in 2023.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative O'Brien?
So there's a definition of it. Is there also any policy that's being sort of pushed, saying like when at all possible use IPM?
So I would say that these best management practices, that was one of AIB's main recommendations that we'll kind of go through more is, yeah, let's have these best management practices centered on IPM principles. So I would say this is our first kind of, here, like, let's really focus on this.
Right.
So next, we wanted to apologize for not including this level of detail of how the AIB recommendations came about, of how the best management practice proposed rule was developed. So we thought we would walk through these required topics that are listed in statute for in developing the rules, the Ag Innovation Board, the Secretary shall address. And so these 7 topics actually framed how AIB approached their legislative responsibility, right? So these 7 topics is how AIB decided what they needed to know, what they knew already, and what more they needed to learn in order to make a recommendation. So they first did it and went through these topics with their recommendation for neonic treated seeds, and then with the expanded scope with the passage of Act 182 that included neonic pesticides. They again went through these A through G required topics and decided what additional recommendations they needed to make. So the following slides are actually pulled from testimony that was given to this committee in January of 24 on the AIB recommendations for BMPs for neonic treated seeds. So I've updated them today to include any further information or considerations that the AIB had after that scope of the recommendations expanded with the passage of 182. So this work is captured in both the 2023 AIB annual report and the 2024 annual report. So over those 2 years, this is how AIB approached it. So they brought in subject matter experts. So university researchers, seed industry, our neighbors to the north, Quebec and Ontario Ministry of Agriculture representatives, and then also just state employees, as well as any AIB members that have relevant experience. So looking specifically at the topics, A and E kind of go hand in hand. So E is surveillance and monitoring techniques. So basically you scout and monitor to determine if thresholds are met, and then decide if control is necessary for your target pest. And so AIB looked at both of these topics together. So AIB A and E are grouped together. And so they learned for neonic seed that purchasing happens, and Representative Nelson can tell you months ahead of the season. And so if you are scouting for pest pressure before you're planting, it's unlikely to influence what seeds you're purchasing. And on the other hand, if you're scouting before you're purchasing, it's not necessarily a clear indicator of what your pest pressure is going to be the following spring. So AIB also considered that one of the main pests that's targeted with neonic treated seeds is the corn seed maggot, and there's very few methods for scouting available for that pest, and no economic threshold is established. So Dr. Darby at UVM is currently working in collaboration with Cornell of being able to better predict the emergence and pest pressure of the corn seed maggot. I think she talked about that a little bit last week. And so the AIB also learned that there's no insecticide rescue treatment. So once you have corn seed maggot damage, your only option is to replant. Continuing with our A and E required topics to address before seed treatments, growers would protect their crop by applying an insecticide to the soil before planting, so in furrow insecticide treatments. However, the innovation of treated seeds was a much better choice, less site-specific, mitigated any potential risk to an applicator, and much less product going out on the ground. And so they became universally accepted. So with that universal use, it comes the potential that maybe, we've been using them for decades. There might be a halo effect that's happening that has reduced the population of pests. So it's unclear. We don't know yet how much that halo effect might be affecting or continue to affect any seeds that are planted that don't have that neonic protection. So based on these learnings, AIB recommended more research was needed on predicting the occurrence of pests in order to make pest management decisions. And then when looking at these topics for general neonic pesticide use, the AIB reviewed previously published research and BMPs relevant to IPM principles, so thresholds and monitoring and scouting and mitigating risks. And so the AIB recommended to include IPM-based BMPs for neonic pesticides. However, they did call out that specific threshold values and specific guidance shouldn't be part of the rule language, because they wanted that to be able to change quickly and adapt as research was continuing. So the required topic B is availability of non-neonic treated seeds. These considerations haven't changed since January of 2024 when we testified last about it, but overall non-neonic seed availability is very limited, and limiting seed options for Vermont farmers takes away their flexibility to adjust to closer to planting time, so they won't be able to exchange for shorter or longer maturities. Also, taking away kind of this universal treatment also will limit their available seed traits, as Steve Jadwana alluded to on Tuesday. The next required topic is C, economic impact from crop loss compared to crop yield. So AIB recommended that more research was needed under Vermont conditions, and that's specifically because previous research did not capture our typical practice of incorporating really high amounts of organic matter. And so you heard Heather is working on this now to compare those different land management practices and including what's common in Vermont in those comparisons so we can learn more. In terms of the economic impact of neonic pesticide use, we'll see. I think, the prohibition takes effect in a couple months. So we'll see if there is an economic impact of that. Required topic D is the relative toxicities of neonic treated seeds and also neonic pesticides and effects on human health and the environment. So first, In 2023, AIB's member, Dr. Owen, was a state toxicologist with the Department of Health. And so she reviewed the EPA human health risk assessment for imidacloprid. Imidacloprid is one of the 3 neonic active ingredient chemicals that are currently undergoing EPA registration review process, meaning they're doing the entire risk assessment review of those chemicals and their uses. And so because they're in a class, they're grouped together. So she did the imidacloprid one, but with similar use profiles, the others should follow suit. And then also in terms of toxicities, AIB considered and learned quite a bit about the significant toxicity to honeybees. AIB also learned that previous research showed exposure risk of dust generated during planting of treated seed, corn seed, and soybean potentially contributed to bee mortalities in some previous situations. So these are more learnings of the AIB relevant to the kind of different routes of neonic exposures to non-target species and dust generated from treated seed. This also hasn't changed since January 24 when we previously testified. So I'm not going to go over it in detail, but by all means, we can come back to it if you have some more detailed questions. As I mentioned on Tuesday, the Canadian Pest Management Regulatory Agency prohibits the use of talc and graphite as seed lubricants. And the AIB also heard from the seed industry and how they are continuously working to improve the coatings on the seed. So in order to basically hold the treatments on there better. And we saw maybe the difference in those improved seed coatings and the difference between the red and the green seed varieties that Dr. Darby showed in her testimony last week. So overall, AIB's recommendation relevant to topic D for seed treatment was to learn more about dust generation and its impact under Vermont conditions. And growers need outreach and education to understand their potential impact of using these neonic treated seeds and how they can reduce that risk. And so those BMPs are reflected in the proposed rule. For neonic pesticides, the AIB understands the EPA registration review of the neonic active ingredients, and that review leads to those mandatory label statements and restrictions that we went through some of them on Tuesday as well. And that label language is there to mitigate any human health and environmental risks that the EPA has identified. Required topic F are the ways to reduce pest harborage from conservation tillage practices. AIB learned that no-till practices are less attractive to corn seed maggot. Basically, it's all about they really like that organic matter all chewed up. So basically, it doesn't expose as much organic matter when you don't till it. And Heather is learning more about this and continuing to research to understand what practices may be able to reduce pest pressures and be less attractive. And how that compares to kind of other recommended practices in Vermont about tillage and our common practices. So it's going to be a balance between recommendations based on what she learns. The last required topic is G, criteria for a system of approval of neonic treated seeds and neonic pesticides. AIB considered existing regulations in Quebec and Ontario, and for neonic pesticides, Vermont will follow EPA registration review processes and will align with their system of approval. However, with the passage of Act 182, we've added some further restrictions. So we have an opportunity to revise that system of approval for neonic treated seeds and neonic pesticides as we develop that exemption order process.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you. Diamide. How is the toxicity of diamide as compared to neonate?
Yeah, so that also, and I can provide it later, so that was also part of that January 2024 testimony, and it's still pretty toxic to bees. It's slightly less toxic. It might be one thing where you push something here and something falls off the table over here. So it might have higher toxicities to things in the Lepidopteran order. So butterflies, for example. So that's
How about humans?
human. I don't think it, I think it's in the same line of neonics is pretty low risk. Not like your organophosphates. So neonics were developed to replace organophosphates.
Yeah,
Organophosphates were a class of insecticides that had pretty significant human health risks.
all right, and what about the Omri products, spinosad?
Spinosad is, I don't know the specifics on that one. I don't know, Steve, if you know.
Go ahead.
Steve.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, Steve Goynell, AMC Agricultural Food Markets. Yeah, so spinosad has very favorable for human health risks. And pretty good for environmental overall. It is, I believe it has better toxicity characteristics for bees. It is used to some extent for mosquito control, so it's obviously toxic. Yeah, so that's it. The one I think drawback is cost and availability.
You don't have to wear a respirator when you're, I thought that was in the BPE was for spinosad.
That's right, depends on the formulation. But we can pull up, I'll pull up a label right now. Take a look.
Yeah, I do know also, Steve mentioned costs, that diamides are significantly more expensive than neonics.
The dynamite there.
Representative O'Brien?
One thing I don't remember Heather going over was, as part of IPM, was there sort of rotational plantings, you know, if you put soybeans where you had corn the year before and just to throw the corn maggot.
Right, so
Eyes
you,
off.
right, you want to rotate in a crop that is not attractive, right? So you want to throw them off to say like, oh, I can't always go to this row
Right.
and get my lunch, you know? So yeah, exactly, that's part of IPM. I don't think that's part of her current trials.
Okay.
I think that it's part of general IPM practices. And so I would say, like, we tried to be general in the proposed rule as far as that. I would say that's like a cultural practice underneath IPM definitions, right? So it's use your, rotate crops so that you break the cycle of the pest. So I think that would be covered under that general BMP that's in the proposed rule, but it definitely could be included as a call, a specific call out too.
And then, as I understand it, soybeans also are treated articles, so there must be another insect that goes after those.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely AIB heard many more presentations about corn than soy. I know soy is gaining, a foothold here in Vermont. And it just gets lumped in, in all the Canadian regulations, it still gets lumped in, but I think it has pretty similar pests as corn. But we can check with Heather.
Representative Byrd?
I wasn't here last session, so I've been getting familiarized with this whole topic, but neonics haven't been around for like a tremendously long amount of time. It looks like he was mentioning something about 2005.
I think it's around the 90s here.
The 90s
Yeah.
in the US. Okay, so it's been longer. I don't know if there's any historical data on what was, or any data on what was used prior to neonics.
So before neonics, it was mainly, they were here to replace the organophosphates. So your OPs, you probably have seen, in apples. So, but as you know, OPs have a higher risk profile for mammals. And so I think that was the main impetus to try and have an alternative. And so neonics have a really favorable mammalian toxicity rating. And so then And as with everything, it's almost like a silver bullet. And so they were pretty universally accepted. And then when it started going on feeds, then it was, that's all that's there. That, this is so great. We got rid of our OPs and we don't have to even handle the concentrated chemical.
And our OPs, also, systematic. In terms of, the way they move through the plant, is that they're similar to neonics in that regard?
I don't know the answer to that, but Steve might.
Yes, Steve, well, again, no, so organophosphates are not systemic in the same way that neonics are, primarily due to water solubility. The systemic materials, and there's a number of different products, different types of chemistries are, but they have to be fairly water soluble to be taken up by the plants. And organophosphates tend to not be that water soluble. So they're more foliar applied. And just as another point, prior to the use of the neonicotinoid seed treatments, the practice for protecting planting seeds was to add the insecticide at planting. And, yeah, so they were, if you look at the planters that were in place at those, use of the time, they all had an insecticide box that was on the part of the planter. You'd have to manually add the insecticide and the fungicide and everything else.
Is that usually granular or?
They're both granular and liquid formulations, but what that resulted in is higher rates of application because you had to make sure you got enough in the furrow and exposure to the handlers, because you have a so keep your hand on the pesticides.
Just to follow up on that, they probably organophosphates predate, for the most part, treated article seeds, right? So if I wanted to buy an OP treated corn seed, it's probably impossible, right?
Well, I don't think that they didn't market them.
Right.
Yeah, I don't.
The technology is dependent on that particular.
It was all foliar.
Yeah, well, it was applied in furrow.
Okay.
So it was put in the soil, so it surrounded the corn seed in the soil. And the rates were about 10 times the amount that we applied when we applied the neonicotinoids as seed treatments. And then, I mean, going way back, they didn't, the plants, the corn, the soybean didn't have the plant incorporated that's, resident in modern varieties. So in addition to using insecticides at planting, you would have to go back later and apply insecticides foliar. You'd have to crop one or more times, to protect against other, primarily moths, cattle.
What effect did OPs have on pollinators?
They can be very toxic to pollinators if they're exposed. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, so now we just wanted to kind of take a step back to kind of annual report land, right? So in 2024, the AIB did welcome a few new members. And so new members listed on here, Nate Norse, he's a crop consultant and blueberry producer. So he's representing the fruit and vegetable farmers on the AIB. And Brian Kemp was an organic dairy farmer. So he represented the organic farming community as required on the AIB. And then Pamela Wadman replaced Dr. Owen as our representative from the Department of Health. Overall, AIB met 8 times in 2024. All of those meetings are recorded and all meeting materials are online for the public. And then in addition, all of the formal reports and recommendations are also available online.
The meeting's regularly scheduled, or is it a prescribed? You should meet 8 times a year.
So it's so in statute, they have to meet at least 4 times a year. So actually, if I can remember my numbers, from 8 is less than 2023. I think we tried to meet every month. So I think we maybe had 11. We may have missed one, combined that November, December meeting. And so mainly because we knew we had so much to tackle. And I'm sorry, I'm saying we with my AIB hat on. So the AIB knew they had a lot to go through and a lot to learn in order to make an informed recommendation. And so they met quite a bit. And so the same thing happened in 2024. Meetings were a little more spread out in the beginning of the year. And then once, the legislative session and the Munich bill came in, then they crammed them in every month. So normally they're scheduled for the fourth Monday of the month. Now we've gone to the fourth Monday of every other month is the plan with some flexibility. So just as we went through, the main focus of 2024 after the passage of 182 was to address that expanded scope of recommendations for VMPs to include neonic pesticides to go along with their already submitted recommendations for the neonic treated seeds. This is the timeline you guys saw on Tuesday. Just wanted to show where these annual reports fit in. So they are submitted by January 15th every year. And so the 2024 annual report also includes as an appendix that submitted recommendation for VMPs for neonic treated seeds to try and kind of put it all in one place, even though it spanned years. So in addition, in 2024, AIB heard from the Vermont Center for Eco Studies about the status of wild bees in Vermont and their recommendations to improve pollinator habitat. And actually this year, the agency is contracting with Vermont Center for Eco Studies for additional research on diversity and abundance of wild pollinators on farms. So we're looking forward to getting some more data, more and more current data about wild pollinators. Also, we heard from Dr. Heather Darby. She's a frequent visitor of AIB meetings. She keeps us up to date on all of her research projects because they all kind of stem from what AIB learned and recommended. Also from UVM Extension, we heard from pollinator specialist Laura Johnson about pollinator support plan development tool that's available to farmers as guidance on production and land management practices that encourage pollinators. So the AIB kept abreast of Vermont legislature throughout 2024. So they followed the neonic bill closely. And then they knew with the passage in June of their expanded responsibility. But they also follow federal and other state activities relative to neonics. So as I mentioned, EPA is currently going through the registration review process for 3 neonic active ingredient chemicals. They also have issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking for treated seeds. So they're asking for input on how EPA can more closely regulate treated seed. And California is always kind of along the same lines and is following similar legislative ambitions. And so they actually had a law that outlined label requirements for treated seed bags. And then Washington became the 13th state to restrict the use of neonics, meaning you have to be a certified applicator to use neonics. So the BMP development, AIB provided recommendations for neonic treated seeds. That turned into the best management practices for use of insecticide treated seeds that was submitted in March of 2024. Act 182 expanded it. So now we're into, okay, let's look at our required topics A through G. We have to look at them for neonic pesticides. So they went to all the previous published BMPs. You have seen this. I included this just so you had them. The full files of these are attached at the bottom of the PDF. So you can see all the resources and their comprehensive list of BMPs and where they came from. So how members chose to approach this is they took that comprehensive list of BMPs for neonic pesticides and they actually ranked them. So they ranked them according to importance and if they should be included in the proposed rule or not. So in addition, AIB received public comment from the Xerces Society outlining recommended BMPs for both neonic treated seeds and neonic pesticides. And the Xerces Society's BMPs really were built around that basic IPM principles. And so AIB members agreed with that approach. Again, just with that one caveat of recommending that threshold values and specific guidance should not be included in the proposed rule language. So that's more accessible to change as research continues. So I am not going to go over this list because we went through all of them on Tuesday because they were in the proposed rule. But these are all of the BMPs for neonic pesticides that the AIB ranked as high priority as saying that they should be in the proposed language in the rule. So in addition, from the public comment from the Xerces Society, these are the specific BMPs that were not included in their original list of high priority ones to include. And so they pulled some more out from that public comment that they would like to include in the proposed rule. And then this last bullet was important to AIB, and that the rule should be accompanied by a more comprehensive guidance document that includes specific examples and can adjust with new research learnings. And so that guidance document can include information about creating pollinator habitat, because it kind of goes hand in hand, but creating pollinator habitat is outside of the use of neonic treated seeds and the use of neonic pesticides. And so that's how AIB felt like maybe that could be addressed in a separate kind of accompanying document. So overall, AIB made these additional recommendations and then reviewed and accepted the proposed rule language that you heard on Tuesday that was drafted by the agency. So additional topics that are included in the annual report that the AIB heard include PFAS policy discussions and legislative actions, also microplastics research in Vermont, and also drone use in agriculture. And lastly, as required by statute, the AIB conducts an annual survey. And so in 2024, the questions were geared to provide direction for future topics that the AIB should address. So second to non-target pollinator exposure, the environmental impact of concern among farmers surveyed is the disposal of farm materials like tires, ag plastic, and pesticide. So based on these results, AIB plans to continue any pollinator-related responsibilities, support the agency as they go through the rulemaking process as needed, but also begin to learn about agricultural plastic. So alternatives that are available, disposal options, and then this fulfills or addresses a legislative charge that's in the statute for the creation of AIB. It lists 13 things, and one of them is recommend practices to reduce the use and generation of waste associated with plastic in farming. So that's kind of where AIB is headed. Happy to.
Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Plastic. Yesterday, Mr. Dalton was here in Connecticut River Valley Farmers Coalition is doing a big thing on recycling of agricultural plastics. And I'd really like to learn more about that because we generate a prodigious amount of plastic. It would be great if there was some way we could bail that up and send it to recycling. So thanks for reminding me of that.
So the AIB actually heard a representative from the Connecticut River Farmers Association Alliance. I'm saying that wrong, but in our last meeting, and it's about their kind of pilot program. So that kind of kicked off the AIB's venture into plastic. And now, so our next meeting for AIB is on the 19th of May, and we're going to learn a little bit more about plastics. But
Would you we can talk more about it offline, but if you think that's something that we'd like to take testimony on.
Just learn about it and see where it's going and encourage some sort of effort, recycle it, because those bunker silos are all covered with 6 mil plastic and a lot of it.
Rails.
Be better to keep, to not landfill it if that option is available, even if it costs a, small amount to, to get it gone, transportation and get it off the farm or whatever. I don't know, it's a lot.
Yeah.
We're already paid transportation to get it off the farm. For me, it's fairly cheap because it just goes around the corner to Coventry in front of my house.
Yeah.
If you all heard me say $100.
Yeah.
Plastic from their territory costs more, whether it's round bale wrap or bunker silo.
You just throw it in the river.
Live, just a reminder.
Anyway, that's all I have. So I'm happy to go back to answer any questions or to go through more detail of anything.
Representative O'Brien?
So we're considered one of the restricted neonic use states.
Yes.
And you said what, only certified applicators can use it now?
For outdoor use, neonics.
Okay, but as a gardener, I can still buy some seeds
You can seeds, because seeds are, right.
that have, or I can buy
Considered
like vegetables potentially at Home Depot that have a drench in them.
They would not have been drenched in, I wouldn't think, but Steve's gonna try and answer that. Right?
It's Steve Brunel, Agricultural Trade Market. So the labels for neonicotinoids do not allow them to be used for food producing. You can't treat them, can't treat a crop that's going to produce edible fruit or food within a certain period of time. You're not exposed to the rest, that's part of the registration process. There are ornamental plants that are shipped into the state that are treated with neonicotinoids outside the state.
Yep.
And up until July 1 of this year, certified applicators could make applications of neonicotinoid insecticides to ornamental plants in Vermont.
Okay.
And just to be, so the prohibition or the restriction for the registrations or for any outdoor use, they're restricted, okay? And outdoor includes greenhouses, so that's considered outdoor also. So there are some neonicotinoid products that are registered for use in homes or by pest control operators, but they're not outside use. They're using very low concentration materials, for campaigns and things like that.
So if I went to Walmart, if I bought tomatoes, chances are they wouldn't have a drench, but if I bought a rose, it might.
Right, exactly.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So thank you. This presentation is on our page and the report itself is posted to our committee page under reports and resources. So that's the report itself, which is lots of text. So
Yeah, so part of that is because of that appendix. So because we wanted to include that recommendation for neonic treated seeds to kind of complete the picture. So that's that appendix is kind of, because that was a lot of work that AIB did. So that's in there.
You had a slide earlier, a couple slides that had the membership individuals. That's all prescribed also by statute. There should be somebody representing somebody who's a dairy farmer. It's a whole list of things, right?
Yep. So kind of in the brackets here are all the requirements. So
Okay, yeah.
soil biologist, conventional dairy, basically UVM, fruit and veggie, crop consultant, A&R, organic farming community, an environmental organization, non-dairy livestock, and then a representative of Department of Health, water quality, and then agency of ag.
To you. And the origins, the AIB is relatively recently formed, right?
2021, I believe, was the past legislation that created it.
And prior to that, there was some other entity.
There was VPAC, the Vermont Pesticide Advisory Council. And so, yeah, the 2021 basically disbanded VPAC and brought on AIB.
Just a quick footnote on Brian Kemp. I'm pretty sure he's an organic beef farmer.
Beef farmer now, yeah.
So we have in 2025, Brian Kemp is no longer a member. And so he has been replaced by Leon Corse,
Okay.
who's an organic dairy farmer. But in 2024, Brian Kemp was a member. Yeah.
Thank you for your time both today and earlier in the week.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Right, so why don't we break there? I think we're going to be expecting